Hello. All right, so let's get this party started. I'm on my lunch hour this Friday, and I figured that I would have some fun and actually talk a little bit about Fate. So, answering some questions, making sure that anyone who needed some help could get some help, and I thought it might be interesting. I'm, considering getting back into the streaming thing again. We let our previous game sort of lapse. It didn't survive the holidays last year. The holidays are always a dangerous time for gaming, and so I thought that I'd just dip my toes back in and see what I could do to help the Fate role-playing game community. So one of the things I'd like to do is answer some questions. So if you're watching this and you're in the chat, please post some questions. I'll be happy to answer them. I managed to get a couple of questions on Twitter, so I'd like to address those first. So the first question that I was asked about the Fate role-playing game is, can anything be an aspect? The answer to that is yes. There's a little bit of a qualifier there. An aspect is anything that is narratively important to the game. So if you happen to have a circumstance or a thing in the game that you want to be narratively important, then you can add an aspect for it. So if the hallway is long and dark and shadowy, that could, of course, be an aspect, because that's something that you want the players to use. You want that to be something that the players react to. The same is true if you're a player. If you're a player, when you're creating advantage, you are creating things for others to play off of. So, for instance, if you decide that you're going to create advantage by weakening a stone statue for someone else to tip over, then you'll create an aspect such as broken leg on the statue. And that's something that another player can then play off of and tip the statue over, providing some teamwork and balance. Aspects are, in my opinion, one of the great things about Fate, because it allows you to have that narrative focus. So, for instance, you can have a room filled with a lot of different things, but you've created aspects only on two of them. That helps to focus play around the things that you're looking to have be interesting. So yeah, I hope that answers that question, that anything can be an aspect. If there's any follow-up questions, I'll be happy to address them. So I also got another question about Fate, which is, what's a good approach for creating a game that is more mundane and less over the top, such as a serious space game? So one of the things about Fate, especially with a lot of the published works, is that they have a tendency to go gonzo and go over the top. So I'm thinking about Shadows of the Century. It's very 80s. It's very over the top. And gonzo is actually a word that I picked up during the playtest of Shadow of the Century. It's a great book. I suggest you take a look at it. It's available for pre-order now. But it is over the top. And it's part of what the expectations of playing in that game is that you're going to do a lot of ridiculous things and stretch a lot of boundaries. But what if you're a bit more of a serious gamer? Okay, you're a gamer who likes to actually immerse yourself in the world, a gamer who wants to, who's concerned about world building and character development and relationships with other characters, be they players or NPCs. So Fate can do those kinds of games as well. So, for instance, the type of games that I run have a tendency to be those games that are a little bit more, I want to say, deeper or meaningful. It's partially true, because my games end up feeling a lot like the television shows Community or Buffy, where there's a little bit of tongue-in-cheek, a little bit of fun. But at the same time, there's an internal consistency to the players, an internal consistency to the NPCs, to the world and everything that's going on. And so, to answer the question of a good approach for creating a Fate game that's more mundane or more serious is in the tone in which you play the game. So there's no particular rule set that I would recommend to make the game a little bit less weird, a little bit less gonzo, except for the usual kind of like consensus around the type of game that you want to play. So I'm running a home game right now. It's called Royal Pride of Musketeers. Part of the conceit of the game is that the game is fairly low magic. The characters are part of a group that basically hunts spellcasters. This is doing the whole story disservice. There's a lot of depth there, but I don't want this to turn into a 20-minute rant about my home campaign. But and the players have agreed that that's part of the conceit. We do things in a very physical sort of fashion for solving problems. The magic in the world, we've created a palette of things that are possible and things that are not possible with it. Like, for instance, casting a spell like Gaseous Form is completely off the table in that campaign because it breaks the immersion with the type of world that we're trying to create. Magic that benefits strength, or dexterity, or moves things faster, magnetism, those things are a bit more physical, and so they're part of the palette that we've created. So I guess my answer really to the question of what's a good approach for creating a game that's more mundane and less over the top is to create a palette of things that are good for the campaign, that reinforce how you want to play, and a list of things that you do not want that detracts from the type of game that you're going to play. This is a very common like writer's technique or just creator's technique in general. I think Chuck, I can't remember his last name, the famous person behind like Wile E. Coyote, had a series of rules for Wile E. Coyote. And there were stuff like the coyote will never win. The Roadrunner will never talk. Wile E. Coyote will only order from the Acme Company. There's a list of them, and it provided a guiding light for the teams that worked on it. So as a GM or a player in these campaigns, it's helpful to have a guiding light that says we're doing these sorts of things and we're not doing these other things. So that kind of helps to create a balance between the two. I personally think that this is a great question because it boils down to what's a GMing style, like what's a group style. So like creating a game that's more mundane or less over the top, it's a choice that the group makes. I'm a big fan of codified group dynamics. So it's a totally nerd thing to do, but I like to write a gaming charter for every campaign that I run. And in this gaming charter, we list out the things that we want in the campaign. We list out expectations for the person running the game, the GM. We write out a list of expectations for players so that they understand what their expectations are. And depending on the gaming system and depending on the tone of the campaign, those gaming charters can vary. So for instance, like if you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, 5th edition, what about character death? Like, is it expected that character death happens when the dice rolls happen? Is it something where the characters are a bit more protected than that? Like, we're not going to do that very often? Or is it a campaign where it's like, we're not going to have any resurrection spells? And so you have to be very careful. And so these questions answer the tone. And in Fate, it's the same way. It's a matter of taking, making an agreement and having that agreement. So that's a very long answer to that question. And I think that was a really good question. Unfortunately, now I'm out of questions. I've got nothing. So I see that there's nothing going on in the chat room. I'm going to ask if there are any questions. So to see if there's anything that could feed me. Otherwise, I'm just going to go over to Fate's Reddit and see what questions people have posted there. I'm going to do this for maybe another 10 minutes, and we'll see how it works out. If you like it, let me know. If you don't, well, that happens sometimes. All right, so I don't see anyone asking me any questions, and that is okay. So let's see. I'm going to go over to the Fate Reddit, Fate RPG Reddit, and see if there's anything over there. So here's a good question. How to convince players to create advantages and accept compels? That is an excellent question. I'm sure there's some great advice in this thread. I haven't read it yet, but I will answer the question for you. How to convince players to create advantages and accept compels. So one of the things that I've found in my games for, I'm going to break it down. I'm going to start with create advantages, and then I'm going to talk about compels because they're separate things. For create advantage, the best thing that you can do to convince players to create advantages is there's a bit of a carrot and stick there. The carrot that I usually do for new players is I have a sheet that has like a list of accomplishments, like, create advantage, help another player, things like that, just to give them like a laundry list of options that they can do within the system. And that makes them aware of what create advantage can do. But I find that the best way to convince players to create advantage is to actually have the NPCs create advantage. Set them up with a scene where there is like three or four groups of NPCs, and they create advantage, giant hit using all of those advantages. And then you will watch as your players' eyes open up and realize that that is something that they can do. And once they realize that that is something that they can do, then the game starts getting interesting, because then they'll start to create advantages and you'll need to knock those down, and they'll knock down your create advantages, and things get interesting at that point. If the players don't create advantage, and they continue not to, what they'll start to see are your NPCs gaining this benefit that they're not doing. So I think that that's a way to teach them. It also, as part of create advantage, players will start to realize that they aren't siloed the way they are in other games, and that teamwork makes the dream work, to use a commonly used phrase. And so what this means is that you've got, in Fate, when you create advantage, you're kind of like volleying it for someone else to spike. And that's a lot different than playing something like Dungeons and Dragons, where everybody's kind of doing their own thing across the line. It's like, oh, well, I hit for damage, I debuff them, I hit for more damage. And it's a death by 1,000 cuts sort of situation, as opposed to actually like everybody working together to build up one big hit. Not to say that that's the only way to play Fate, obviously. Like, if everybody's just building created advantages on each side, it's not quite as interesting, but pardon me. That's how I do it. I do it by example, and the players pick up on that really fast. Especially with, like, I use the elective action order for initiative. In fact, I made turn tracker cards on drive-through cards to let players do that and manage that at the table better. And they never realized that they should always make sure that one of them goes last in a round until they didn't do it. And I decided to teach them a lesson, and it was bad guy, new turn, bad guy. And from there on out, they never again let the bad guys go last. It was pretty amusing. So, teach by showing for create advantage. For compels, this is different. A lot of games are additive. This means that people are actually trying to get more and stack things on top. Like, they're used to, like, my character gains this, my character gets this. The only thing that characters get rid of is gold, but that's in exchange for an item that's more useful than gold. And so, like, there is a real additive nature to a lot of role-playing games. Compels are, in a way, they're subtractive. So, in a way, it's making life more difficult for a character. And so a lot of players really push back against this because they're like, well, yeah, my character is, a raging alcoholic as his trouble aspect, but I don't see why, I don't see why I would wreck my car or something like that. Okay, so that's probably a bad example. I apologize for anyone who might have been impacted by such an event. But at any rate, the compels are negative things. And so players have to start to realize that the action comes from the compels and that makes it interesting. And so they have to feel like they're not getting screwed over, but they're contributing more to the story. And a big part of that is trust. And trusting that the compels will be worth the fate point and going back and forth. And that's something that if you're coming fresh to a group and maybe you don't know other people and you've got some baggage that doesn't exactly go with that play style, then it takes use care and bring them into the fold and say, like, listen, like this trouble aspect that you have of vain, is going to get you into a little bit of trouble, and it turns into a scene that is more interesting than if it was good, or like if that didn't happen. And so, like, just kind of illustrating that this is something that the players are going to enjoy. So accepting compels is it's a tough situation for new players to fate because they don't like to have negative things applied to their character. So talking about yes and helps a lot. And so what that does is that allows you to kind of tell the players, like, what you need to do is realize that, like, whenever situations like this arise, say yes and lean into it and see what happens as a result of that. Because nothing stops a story faster than a hard no. I know that, like, whenever I play games, I try not to give a hard no. If I give a no, I usually do a redirecting no to try and be like, no, I don't want to do that, but here's an alternative that might be interesting. But most of the time I say yes and, because they're imaginary characters. I'm having a good time. I trust the people that I'm playing with, and things are going to be good. So that's my thoughts on accepting compels, or getting players to accept compels. So I'm going to look through Reddit some more, see if there's anything else interesting in here. This is good. Making compelling poison. This is another one. I have not read the thread in here. There's probably a lot of really good advice. We've got a lot of really sharp people on the Reddit for Fate RPG. I really appreciate that. So let's talk about making compelling poison. So there are a lot of different ways that you can make poison compelling. And so, let's see. Let's start with basic and get complicated. So poison can be at its root just you can use the fate fractal and make it its own character. So, that's actually the thing that I like most about Fate, is that anything can be treated like a character. And so you can have things like poisons making attack, the weather attacks the players, and there's a conflict can be had in those circumstances. Because of the fractal, I actually have a little bit of an issue with the skill list in Fate Core, where it says which skills can be used to attack and which ones can be used to defend, because that's thinking in terms of traditional conflicts. Whereas if the players are fighting against a poison, I would imagine that different things could be attack skills. You can't really shoot poison. So at any rate, so you can use the Fate Fractal to define that poison and actually run it as a conflict. So that's one way that you can do it. You can give it a stress track. You can give it aspects. You can let it attack. And that's a very interesting way to do it, to mimic a conflict with poison. Excuse me. Another way to do it is to do the poison as a not a challenge. I always forget the third one. It's the race condition. It's contest, where the person inflicted by the poison and the poison itself are trying to race for their goals, like the health of the character. So if the poison wins, then the character is not necessarily taken out, but has like, real bad situation. Another one is, and of course, if the hero wins, then they've kind of fought off the poison. That's a little bit of a faster way to deal with the poison. I do prefer the first way, using the Fate Fractal. You can also have poison be an aspect. It can just be an aspect that sits on the character, something that is narratively described, and they have to, in the narrative, figure out a way to have that aspect removed. Like, it could be as simple as a medicine check, or it could be you have to have a medicine check from someone who knows about this poison, or you have to find this item, and then you can make a poison check. Like, there's a couple of different ways in which you could try to do a compelling poison. So this has been a lot of fun, answering some questions. I hope that everyone who's watched this has enjoyed it. I know it's only been about 20 minutes. Like I said, it's Friday afternoon. I'm pretty sure everybody's at work anyway. But I wanted to hop on and just have a little bit of fun streaming. I think that I'll do this again next week. I'll post to Reddit and my Twitter account. If you're interested, you can follow me at amazingrando.com, or sorry, at amazingrando on Twitter, or follow the Polyhedral crew. And that's about it. Thank you everyone for coming, and have yourself a great weekend. Bye.